cop smirks as black woman takes the stand in court, unaware she's a top FBI investigator. "You're asking for trouble." The warning meant nothing to Officer Henry Donovan. For years, he ruled the streets, feared by criminals and respected by his peers. But what he didn't know was that someone had been watching, someone who had quietly gathered enough evidence to destroy everything he built. And today, in a packed courtroom, that person was about to take the stand. Stay until the end, because this story will leave you speechless. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss a story like this from Dark Stories. The hush that settled inside the U.S. District Court on that chilly Tuesday morning felt more like the stillness before a thunderstorm. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of curious onlookers, journalists, concerned citizens, and law students eager to witness the conclusion of a gripping corruption trial. At the front of the courtroom, presiding over the proceedings was Judge Maria Townend, her stoic, thoughtful gaze revealing none of her inner feelings about the case. Some people in attendance had never stepped foot in a courtroom before, others made it their weekly routine to observe dramatic trials. Today, they all shared a single tension: they anticipated a star witness who rumors said would blow the case wide open. In the defendant's seat sat Officer Henry Hank Donovan, a tall, broad-shouldered man with thinning hair and a pressed police uniform that looked a size too big around his midsection. Next to him, his defense attorney, Theodore Kane, sipped water and tapped his pen on the table, betraying subtle agitation. Despite that, Donovan himself remained outwardly calm, a faint smirk twisting the corner of his mouth. He leaned back, scanning the crowd as if daring anyone to challenge him. He had served on the force for over 2 decades, earning both accolades and quiet mutterings from fellow officers. Donovan's reputation wasn't squeaky clean. He was known to push boundaries during drug busts, sometimes physically, sometimes legally. Before these corruption charges surfaced, his direct superiors had conveniently looked the other way. After all, he had an uncanny knack for getting high arrest numbers and for making the department look efficient. No one had ever thoroughly questioned how or why his methods got results. But life had shifted drastically for Donovan in recent months. The district attorney's office had opened a wide-reaching investigation into potential police corruption, and Donovan's name had been the first to surface. Rumors swirled of embezzled funds, bribery, and suspicious associations with local gang members. The evidence so far, though significant, felt like an incomplete puzzle. Everyone sensed that a bombshell piece of testimony would be needed to tilt the scale decisively. Can you imagine the shock when the truth is finally revealed? Hold on to your seats, because the twist is coming. The lead prosecutor, Michael Bennington, was a soft-spoken man in his late 40s with a precise way of speaking that contrasted with the flamboyant tactics of some colleagues. He was well respected in the legal community, recognized for his dogged determination and unwavering moral compass. His calm, methodical style was in full view today. He rose from his seat and approached the bench, the soles of his polished shoes clicking on the marbled floor. The sound reverberated in the silent hall. "Your Honor," he began, his voice resonating with unspoken urgency, "the prosecution calls Miss Maya Alexandria Richards to the stand." The moment the name left his lips, a cluster of reporters at the back of the room started whispering rapidly. Some frantically checked their notes or typed on their phones, trying to identify who exactly was being called. Rumor had it that the prosecution had been waiting until the perfect moment to introduce a witness with a trove of damning evidence. Few people in that courtroom recognized the name Maya Richards, even fewer had any notion of her importance. Officer Donovan exhaled an almost amused snort. For the last few weeks, he'd heard whispers that the DA's office had some sort of secret weapon. The smirk that now lit up Donovan's face betrayed his absolute skepticism. If the prosecution thought some random civilian or minor detective could bury him, they were sorely mistaken. He had faced internal affairs before and knew how to dodge and deflect. He leaned over to his lawyer and murmured, "We've got nothing to worry about." Then, the heavy double doors at the rear of the courtroom swung open, revealing a striking black woman in her early 30s. She wore a simple but well-tailored navy pantsuit that conveyed both professionalism and calm authority. Her hair was neatly styled in a shoulder-length bob, and she carried a leather briefcase with an air of ease that spoke volumes of her self-confidence. This was Maya Alexandria Richards. With every step she took toward the witness stand, a current of curiosity spread through the spectators. Some recognized her face from quietly circulated photographs, but those in the crowd who had never seen her before stared with open curiosity. Maya climbed the few steps to the witness box and took her seat. Court clerks maneuvered around, found her, handing her a Bible for the oath. She set her right hand on it and repeated, voice steady, "I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God." Judge Townsend leaned forward, her eyes flicked momentarily to Donovan, who had now stopped smirking for a moment, and then back to the witness. "Please state your name and your occupation for the record." Maya cleared her throat. "My name is Maya Alexandria Richards. I am a supervisory special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." That was the moment the entire courtroom seemed to gasp as one entity. Donovan's reaction was instant and telling. The smug grin slipped from his face, replaced by a look of guarded surprise. His attorney's eyes widened, and he quickly began flipping through his notes, alarmed that he was blindsided by the fact that the star witness was an FBI agent. Maya was not just some random detective from a neighboring precinct, she was a top investigator, one with the authority and gravitas to back up her claims. Reporters at the back were jolted into a frenzy of writing and typing, camera shutters clicked. This was bigger news than anyone had anticipated. A top FBI investigator testifying in a local corruption case suggested something far-reaching, perhaps even tying into a network of illicit activity within the police force. The significance was not lost on anyone. Maya gazed calmly across the courtroom, meeting no one's eye directly, yet seeming to see everyone. She carried herself with the composure of someone who had navigated high-stakes operations before and wouldn't be easily rattled. The hush in the gallery turned from mere curiosity to electrified suspense. Judge Townsend offered a professional nod. "Thank you, Agent Richards. Prosecution, you may proceed." Bennington wasted no time. "Agent Richards, could you please explain your role at the FBI and perhaps illuminate for the court why you're testifying in this particular case?" "Certainly," Maya began, her voice smooth and meticulously measured. "As a supervisory special agent, I lead a specialized task force operating under the offices of the FBI's Public Corruption Division. We investigate allegations of misconduct and illegal activities involving public officials, including law enforcement. In this capacity, I have been investigating allegations against Officer Henry Donovan for nearly a year." Another wave of hushed murmurs swept through the audience. Donovan's expression contorted into momentary disbelief, as though the notion that someone had been watching him for a year without his knowledge was inconceivable. His arrogance had always told him no one could infiltrate his carefully curated networks. Maya's presence was so commanding that even Judge Townsend had to lean back in her chair, an involuntary sign of taking in the magnitude of this testimony. The defense attorney looked as though he were mentally recalculating every strategy he'd prepared, uncertain how best to discredit a witness of this caliber. Bennington nodded. "Agent Richards, please tell the court how you came to focus on Officer Donovan's activities." Maya referred to a neatly organized stack of notes she had prepared over the past 4 years. "The FBI has been investigating multiple instances of police corruption in this region. The impetus for this deeper dive was a series of complaints from local residents who alleged harassment, falsified charges, and exploitation by members of law enforcement. Officer Donovan's name repeatedly surfaced during our preliminary interviews, suggesting a pattern of improper conduct." Pausing, she glanced at the crowd, meeting the eyes of several people who likely recognized Donovan's name from their own encounters with him on the streets. "Given the frequency of these allegations, I was assigned to launch a covert operation, the main objective of which was to determine whether Donovan was taking bribes, planting evidence, or otherwise abusing his power." Donovan couldn't hold his tongue, he leaned toward his attorney, face twisted in disdain. But the judge's gavel cracked through the moment. "Officer Donovan," Judge Townsend admonished quietly, "I'd recommend you confer in whispers, do not interrupt the witness." The defense attorney patted Donovan's arm, his own face tight. One disruption was more than enough. Bennington resumed with a poised question. "Agent Richards, did you in fact go undercover in this case?" "Yes, I did." "And could you elaborate on the nature of that undercover operation?" "Of course," Maya said, her voice never wavering. "Operating primarily out of the J. Edgar Hoover building in Washington, D.C., I took on a cover identity that allowed me to integrate into certain social circles frequented by associates of Officer Donovan. Over the course of 8 months, I collected audio recordings, financial data, and other forms of evidence, all aimed at exposing how these individuals were colluding to launder illicit funds. Donovan's name was front and center. A collective gasp punctuated the air. While everyone had assumed Donovan's trial was about typical police corruption charges like extorting small businesses or roughing up suspects, nobody had fully grasped the possibility of a more layered scheme involving laundered funds. Bennington cleared his throat, but his voice carried a note of satisfaction. So, to confirm, you spent 8 months undercover directly observing the activities of Officer Donovan and his associates? That's correct. Would you kindly share with the court the nature of these activities in as much detail as you can, Agent Richards? And so it began. Maya detailed how Donovan allegedly used his position to intimidate local business owners into paying protection fees. She outlined how he filed falsified police reports against anyone who refused to pay, and how he pocketed cash from some of the city's most notorious street gangs. Witnessing his smug grin vanish entirely fueled the dramatic tension in the room. By the time she finished, the crowd was riveted, breathing as one, as though enthralled by a cinematic thriller. Every new piece of evidence Maya recited felt like another nail hammered into Donovan's defense. The narrative was so comprehensive and intricately documented that Donovan's lawyer was visibly sweating. Yet the tension in Donovan's eyes also hinted at fierce resistance. He was not a man accustomed to losing. Despite the avalanche of evidence, he radiated a barely reined fury. His body language made it clear he blamed Maya personally for all that was happening, as though she had orchestrated some personal vendetta rather than executing a lawful investigation. Bennington moved a few steps closer to the witness stand, confidently clasping his hands. Agent Richards, the defense has contended that these accusations are based on inane or fabricated evidence. What's your response to that claim? Maya lifted her chin. Every piece of evidence was collected per FBI protocols, which require proper chain of custody documentation validated by multiple agents within my team. We have phone call logs, text message exchanges, and bank records that corroborate each transaction's date and details. At this juncture, Donovan's lawyer jumped up, his voice sharper than before. Objection, Your Honor, the witness is making conclusions about the nature of these financial records without. Judge Townsend gestured for him to approach. After a brief hushed conversation at the bench, she signaled for him to return to his seat. Objection overruled. The witness may continue. This small triumph for the prosecution caused Donovan to slump back in his chair, his face slowly turning red. The smirk he had worn so casually at the start of the day was nowhere to be found. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the temperature seemed to rise as the morning wore on. Even the overhead lights, bright, unwavering, seemed to spotlight Donovan's growing discomfort. Maya continued her testimony methodically, outlining each damning piece of evidence. The gallery listened, rapt, reporters typed furiously, and the tension built with every sentence. As the session broke for lunch, Donovan stood quickly, brushing past anyone in his path, his fists clenched at his sides. He paused only once to cast a venomous glance at Maya. She returned his glare with unwavering composure. In that glare exchange, onlookers could almost see the gravity of the fight that was unfolding, a fight about power and deceit, with truth and justice poised to unmask everything. Little did Donovan know that Maya held more than just a year's worth of intelligence. She had meticulously prepared for every angle of the defense's strategy. While he spent his lunch break in a furious huddle with his lawyer, Maya was busy reviewing files and conferring with the prosecution team, ensuring no detail would slip through the cracks. Outside the courthouse steps, the press was already swirling, discussing the biggest shock of the day. The star witness was not just any detective or whistleblower, but a high-ranking FBI agent who had single-handedly infiltrated Donovan's circles. The public hadn't even begun to grasp the breadth of the revelations that were to come. Long before Maya Richards arrived in that courthouse, seeds of corruption had already taken deep root in Donovan's sphere of influence. It began slowly, almost imperceptibly. Donovan started as a wide-eyed rookie, eager to earn the respect of veterans in the precinct. Working in a tough neighborhood, he was lauded for his bravery in high-crime situations. However, the environment was rife with unspoken arrangements. Certain criminals were allowed to operate if they fed intel back to the cops. For a time, Donovan resisted. He refused to accept bribes or even the favored coffee at the local diner. But as months passed, he saw that other officers were quick to accept perks. They rationalized it: certain bribes were small enough that they didn't harm anyone, right? A little side money here, a nudge there, and criminals stayed in check, or so they convinced themselves. The precinct's internal affairs had tried to investigate, but the corruption ran so deep that whistleblowers were shut down or transferred. Meanwhile, Donovan noticed how easy it was to manipulate departmental rules if the brass was turning a blind eye. A stack of paperwork could vanish with the right friend in the records department, a confrontation with a drug dealer could be sanitized in the official report. He witnessed senior officers doing it, and eventually, the lines in his own moral compass began to blur. When Donovan made detective, small-time thank yous from store owners turned into consistent hush money. Sometimes they paid to be left alone during questionable business hours, other times to ensure Donovan wouldn't mention certain packaging shipments to his superiors. Every time a corner was cut, Donovan rationalized it as another rung on the ladder to keep the peace and to keep himself comfortable. Before long, Donovan had become the liaison for a group of unscrupulous real estate investors looking to capitalize on neighborhoods plagued by crime. He received a cut each time they managed to buy properties cheaply from terrified homeowners. Donovan's job was to use his badge to intimidate, to exaggerate the crime rates and push potential sellers into compliance. It was easy enough to stage a late-night police raid or to hint that unsolved burglaries were around the corner, stoking fear. With each successful move, Donovan's pockets grew heavier, and his moral boundary receded further into darkness. Yet no matter how deeply he immersed himself in these dirty dealings, Donovan maintained an outward facade of normalcy. He was known to host barbecues for fellow officers on weekends, always with a broad grin and free-flowing beer. For many in the precinct, he was just an old-school cop, slightly rough around the edges, but loyal to his blue family. Underneath that facade, though, lay an ever-expanding empire of illicit transactions. Not only did Donovan handle bribery money, but he also gained the loyalty of smaller street gangs by allowing their operations to continue unimpeded, provided they paid a monthly sum. The arrangement suited both parties well. Donovan stayed under the radar of his high-ups because he kept the official crime rate stable. The gangs got breathing room to grow their businesses without fear of major police busts. Local residents bore the brunt of the deal without recourse or a safe channel to lodge complaints. They learned to keep their heads down. The first real threat to Donovan's castle of corruption was the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A handful of local activists, refusing to remain silent, had begun sending letters to the FBI detailing patterns of harassment and suspicious arrests. Most letters went unanswered or were lost in bureaucratic red tape, but one letter was forwarded to the desk of a dedicated FBI analyst who saw too many coincidences to ignore. Eventually, those leads found their way up the chain of command to Maya Richards. At that time, Maya had already built a distinguished record within the Public Corruption Division. She'd orchestrated takedowns of municipal officials and crooked police officers in other states. Her superiors knew she possessed the tenacity and methodical approach to tackle anything from petty bribery to large-scale racketeering. So began the stealth campaign. As Donovan grew complacent, Maya's team scoured his records: every questionable arrest, every suspicious bank deposit, every tip from a local business owner brave enough to speak up. Within months, they saw the pattern: Donovan was orchestrating a sophisticated pipeline of money and influence. The FBI needed more than just circumstantial evidence, though. They needed to catch Donovan's operation from the inside. Maya volunteered for the assignment. There was an unwritten rule in her department: if you wanted the job done right, you put yourself on the line. She carefully crafted a cover story, forging a persona that would allow her access to Donovan's circle of shady collaborators. She wore a different name, took a different job, even found herself frequenting the very bars and underground clubs where Donovan's associates might roam. It was grueling work. She spent countless nights building trust with individuals who had no idea she was an FBI agent. She laughed at jokes she found repulsive, feigned curiosity in unscrupulous deals, and made sure never to let her true self slip. One evening at a dingy bar, she nearly lost her cool upon witnessing a group of Donovan's associates bragging about how easily they could force local homeowners out. But she bit her tongue, playing the part of someone who found their stories interesting. All the while, Maya meticulously documented every conversation. She used hidden recording devices, coded phone messages to her own team, and an elaborate system of dead drops for turning over critical items without raising suspicion. Donovan remained an enigmatic figure. While many of his associates boasted about their connections to the big man, Donovan himself rarely made a public appearance outside official police functions. He was cunning enough to keep a comfortable distance. Yet the deeper Maya dove, the clearer it became that Donovan's crimes extended further than local bribes. She discovered shaky leads suggesting an even bigger infiltration of corrupt officers in neighboring precincts, each paying Donovan for certain passes. If everything panned out, Donovan wouldn't just be facing a standard corruption charge, he could be brought down under RICO statutes reserved for organized crime. But infiltration came with its own set of perils. Every misstep carried the risk of exposing Maya's true identity, which could put her life in jeopardy. More than once, she spotted suspicious glances from a gangster who'd wonder why she asked so many questions, or from an inebriated officer who found her face strangely familiar. Each time, she covered her tracks. Nonetheless, the stress weighed heavily, especially when she saw firsthand how Donovan's unchecked power was decimating the lives of ordinary people, often people who looked like her. It was no secret that Donovan's tactics had a pronounced effect on black communities who had few avenues to seek help. Maya learned of one mother whose son had been arrested on trumped-up charges because she couldn't afford Donovan's security fee. Another father lost his auto shop license after Donovan orchestrated repeated health inspections and ghost complaints. For Maya, these stories ignited a personal fire. She wasn't just doing her job, she was defending communities that had been systematically bullied and marginalized. The mission took on a deeper moral imperative. Finally, after months of infiltration, Maya collected enough proof to persuade the FBI brass to act. She'd captured Donovan's voice on tape agreeing to shake down a local bar owner. She'd secured bank records connecting Donovan's personal accounts to shell companies used by a street gang. In the background, she orchestrated a small team to raid certain addresses at strategic moments, seizing computers, ledgers, and unregistered firearms. When the net closed, Donovan was taken by surprise, arrested after finishing a routine patrol shift. Now, months later, the entire operation's results had come to a head in that very courtroom. Beneath Donovan's stoic exterior before Maya's testimony lurked the knowledge that the FBI's net was wide and strong. He had pinned hopes on finding a prosecutorial weak spot or a bungling of chain of custody paperwork, but no such error had emerged. The case was tight, the evidence thorough. Maya, for her part, was determined not just to convict Donovan, but to shine a light on the systemic issues that allowed men like him to thrive. Though not naive enough to believe one conviction would fix an entire institution, she harbored the hope that justice could spark bigger reforms. From the very start of her career, she dreamed of wearing the FBI badge with pride, holding accountable those who believed themselves untouchable. After the lunch recess, the courtroom filled up once more, thrumming with anticipation. Donovan returned alongside his attorney, Theodore Kane, who continuously whispered instructions, presumably telling him how to maintain composure and not react to Maya's statements from the witness stand. Maya watched them approach, carefully noting Donovan's rigid posture. He appeared calmer, but still wore the same unsettling glint in his eye. Pride, anger, or fear, it was hard to tell. Maya wondered briefly if her testimony had shaken him. It took years to develop the observational prowess that served her so well as an undercover agent, and everything in Donovan's body language told her he was fighting some internal battle. He likely realized that the power he held was precariously close to toppling. Prosecutor Bennington stood up again, shuffling a sheath of documents before casting a measured gaze at Maya. Agent Richards, you've spoken about the broader context of Officer Donovan's alleged activities. Let's delve into specific incidents for which you gathered direct evidence. Maya nodded, scanning her memory. Certainly. One key incident took place on October 14th of last year. My undercover persona had arranged a meeting with a contact from Donovan's circle, an individual known on the street as Kaz. We met at a bar on Oakwood Avenue. Kaz demanded a $22,000 bribe to ensure that the local precinct wouldn't interfere with an upcoming illicit gambling event. Kaz explicitly mentioned that Donovan was behind the protective arrangement. Before she could continue, Donovan's attorney leapt to his feet. Objection, Your Honor, hearsay regarding the mention of my client's name. Judge Townsend slowly surveyed the parties, then shook her head. Agent Richards is recounting direct observations and recorded statements made during her investigation. Overruled, proceed. Maya continued, unflustered. I wore a hidden audio recording device that night. The device captured Kes describing how he had to split the bribe with Donovan and two other officers. The recordings are timestamped with identifying background noise that's verified by the FBI's forensic audio lab. There was a momentary hush as the jury processed the significance. Audio evidence was compelling. Juries often found it more trustworthy than third-party recollections. Bennington capitalized on the moment, stepping forward. Agent Richards, were you able to verify that Officer Donovan received any portion of that bribe? Yes, we traced a deposit of $1,200 made into Officer Donovan's personal checking account at a local credit union exactly 2 days after the bar meeting. The deposit date and amount match what was discussed in the recorded conversation. Donovan stirred, crossing his arms. Maya recognized the sense of cornered fury in his eyes. His attorney scribbled notes, presumably looking for a line of argument to delegitimize the evidence, but the thoroughness of the FBI's chain of custody made that difficult. Bennington pressed forward. Were there other incidents of a similar nature? Multiple, Maya replied. Throughout my undercover assignment, I documented at least 6 separate instances where Donovan or his intermediaries arranged protection in exchange for cash. These ranged from illegal gambling operations to unlicensed house parties where drugs were openly sold. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. I also have records indicating that Donovan threatened local business owners who tried to cooperate with law enforcement outside his protection ring. He would claim they were harboring criminals or violating city ordinances. Then, after scaring them, he would present an alternative, pay him, and the harassment would stop. In the back, a cluster of people nodded, likely business owners or friends of those impacted by Donovan's tactics, their anger palpable. Bennington lifted a new document. Your Honor, the prosecution would like to enter into evidence FBI Exhibits C through G, which include these audio recordings and financial documentation. Judge Townend acknowledged with a brisk nod. So entered. The defense attorney sighed heavily, a silent admission that each new exhibit cut deeper into Donovan's chances at an acquittal. He rose, visibly preparing for cross-examination, approaching the witness stand. He began in a silky tone, Agent Richards, while we all appreciate the seriousness of these allegations, I need to verify the authenticity and context of these recordings. Isn't it possible that some of these individuals were using Officer Donovan's name to inflate their own reputations? For instance, claiming they had police protection to boost their perceived power on the street? Maya's gaze didn't waver. That was one of our early concerns. However, cross-referencing the individual's claims with Donovan's known activities and financial records confirmed significant overlaps. Moreover, in at least 2 recordings, Donovan's voice is clearly identifiable, captured in a conversation with these individuals about meeting up and splitting money. Kane raised an eyebrow, pivoting strategies. Let's discuss the possibility of bias, Agent Richards. You are testifying against a white police officer, and you yourself are an African-American woman. Are you suggesting you have no personal or political motivations to see this officer convicted, given the ongoing tensions around policing in black communities? A collective hush fell over the room. Even Judge Townsend shot Kane a sharp look. Maya remained poised, though a flicker of annoyance crossed her features. Mr. Kane, my job as an FBI agent is to remain impartial and uphold federal law, regardless of the racial or political nuances of any investigation. My personal background does not influence the validity of the evidence. The recordings and bank records stand on their own. Kane pressed further. But wouldn't you admit that systemic tensions could color your perspective? Maya took a breath. Systemic tensions in policing are real and well documented, but the evidence in this case is factual and objective. It is not reliant on personal opinion. It's reliant on audio recordings, eyewitness accounts, and financial ledgers. Are you suggesting all that evidence is somehow invented by me personally? Kane didn't reply immediately, but the question hung in the air. He cleared his throat, looking momentarily at Donovan as though hoping for a cue. Donovan stared back with silent rage. Finally, Kane regrouped. We are suggesting, Agent Richards, that the context in which you obtained these recordings may not reflect my client's actual intentions. For example, were any of these individuals you recorded threatened or coerced into implicating Officer Donovan? Maya's lips curved in a faint, cold smile. I conducted my investigation under strict FBI guidelines. No coercion was used. Most individuals volunteered details once they believed I was part of their operation. If you wish to review the protocols, we have those too. Kane had no immediate retort. The strings he attempted to pull seemed not to budge. Maya's calm, methodical shield, undeterred, he tried another angle. You mentioned the J. Edgar Hoover building in Washington, D.C. That's the FBI's main headquarters, correct? Yes. And you report directly to your superiors there? I do. Have they pressured you to find a scapegoat in the local police department in order to appease public demand for accountability? Could Officer Donovan be a convenient target? Maya's eyes narrowed. No. My superiors only demanded that I follow the evidence wherever it led. It led to your client. There was nothing convenient about an 8-month undercover operation. Kane opened his mouth to continue, but then closed it, evidently unsure how to push further without alienating the jury. The cross-examination had turned into a quagmire for the defense. Each jab was deflected by the quiet certainty of documented proof. After another moment, Judge Townsend observed, "Counselor, if you have no further questions, we can move on." Kane glanced at Donovan, whose face was a mask of pent-up fury, then he nodded. No further questions, Your Honor. Maya stepped down from the stand with quiet dignity. The entire gallery watched her as she returned to the prosecution's table, exuding a composure that belied the intensity of everything she had just revealed. The trial was far from over, but she had set the tone. The evidence was there, and Donovan's once cocky demeanor was starting to crumble under its weight. That evening, the court adjourned, but the case loomed large in the minds of all who witnessed the day's proceedings. Journalists gathered in the marble-floored foyer, setting up camera lights and filming live news segments. One by one, the lawyers exited, refusing comment or offering curt statements about the importance of due process. Maya stepped through the doorways into the crisp night air, the sounds of city traffic a distant hum. Tall glass and steel buildings around the courthouse glowed with the golden light of dusk. She pulled her coat tighter against the cool breeze and navigated the throng of reporters. A few recognized her, calling out, "Agent Richards, can you speak on the new evidence introduced today? Or will this case set a precedent for further FBI probes?" She kept her face neutral, politely replying that she couldn't discuss ongoing trials, slipping away from the camera flashes. She soon reached an unassuming sedan where two fellow FBI agents waited. It was standard protocol for a case of this magnitude, a precaution against any retaliation. Maya was fully aware that Donovan might still have allies on the streets. The younger agent in the driver's seat, Special Agent Laura Dixon, gave a friendly nod. "Agent Richards, you did a damn fine job on the stand today." Maya settled into the back seat, letting out a slow breath. "Thanks, Dixon. This is just the beginning." The older agent, Jason Carroll, was the more reserved one. He turned in his seat. "We got word from HQ. They're reviewing all your documentation. They want to be ready for any curveballs the defense might throw." Maya nodded. She stared out the window as the sedan pulled away from the curb. Streetlights flickered in the growing darkness, illuminating groups of people. She caught fleeting glimpses of families at bus stops, couples strolling on sidewalks, and clusters of men huddled in the doorways of closed shops. Her mind drifted to the community members Donovan had harmed, people whose faces she'd seen during her undercover work, each bearing the weight of fear and frustration. She wondered how they felt now that Donovan was finally facing the consequences. The car ride was mostly silent. Dixon and Carroll sensed Maya's need for reflection. Pulling up to the safe house, a modest, nondescript apartment building in a quieter neighborhood, they helped her bring in a case of documents. Inside, the atmosphere was utilitarian: a few chairs, a table, a couple of laptops, and stacks of files. They set about reviewing the next day's plan. Additional witnesses would testify about Donovan's intimidation tactics, and the prosecution would present more financial records. By the time the group finished, it was well past midnight. Maya's eyes stung with exhaustion, but her mind was ablaze with the momentum of the trial. She quickly found her designated room and tried to fall asleep, reminding herself that this was a crucial turning point not just for Donovan's conviction, but for demonstrating that accountability was indeed possible, even in a broken system. Morning came swiftly beneath a pale sunrise. Maya re-entered the courthouse alongside the prosecution team. Reporters were already staking out prime spots, their breath visible in the cold. Inside, the courthouse bustled with a new wave of onlookers. The story of Maya's testimony had clearly drawn a larger crowd than ever before. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Once everyone was settled, Judge Townsend arrived, signifying the formal start of the day's proceedings. The bailiff called the court to order, and Michael Bennington stood to address the bench. Your Honor, the prosecution calls our next witness, FBI Special Agent Christopher Brannon. Agent Brannon, a seasoned investigator, walked confidently to the stand where Maya had laid out the undercover operation. Brannon specialized in explaining the forensics, how the FBI had traced suspicious deposits, how they verified voice recordings, and how they confirmed the timeline of events. He began detailing how forensic experts took audio from Maya's hidden recorders and matched them to Donovan's known voice samples. The process involves sophisticated spectrogram analyses and voice recognition algorithms. Brannon spoke matter-of-factly, but the significance was lost on no one. The FBI had scientifically tied Donovan to these criminal exchanges. Defense attempts to dismiss them as hearsay were rapidly collapsing. Donovan and Kane exchanged uneasy looks. Donovan's scowl intensified when Brannon presented charts showing spikes in Donovan's bank balances coinciding with the exact days the bribes were allegedly paid. When Kane rose for cross-examination, his voice wavered slightly. He tried challenging the forensic chain of custody but tripped over technical jargon. Brannon remained composed, clarifying every detail with the air of a patient teacher. The defense's frustration became increasingly obvious. After Brannon stepped down, the prosecution called several local business owners who testified about the intimidation tactics they'd faced. A small grocery store owner recounted how Don had threatened to pull her business license. Another recounted the ominous inspections conducted by Donovan's associates that always ended in demands for protection money. Each new voice painted a larger, grimmer canvas of Donovan's alleged tyranny. He'd wielded his badge not to serve and protect, but to extort and control. Donovan squirmed, but his smirk was nowhere to be seen. Occasionally, he mumbled to Kane, presumably urging him to do anything, to refute these damaging accounts. The defense attorney tried to trip up the witnesses, questioning their motives, but they all told the same consistent story. They couldn't have orchestrated a collective lie this elaborate. Details overlapped seamlessly, reinforcing each other. The truth was damningly clear. By late afternoon, the jury appeared exhausted yet resolute, their eyes flicked between the witnesses and Donovan as though trying to reconcile the uniformed officer before them with the criminal mastermind described by the FBI. Before court recessed, Judge Townsend addressed the room. I want to thank the jury for their attention to these important testimonies. We will reconvene tomorrow morning, and I expect closing arguments soon after the remaining witnesses. All around, a swirl of movement ensued. People stood, stretching, and whispering about the day's revelations. Donovan shot out of his seat and stalked off toward a side hallway, Kane trailing after him. Maya watched the two go, her expression unreadable. Part of her almost felt a pang of pity for Donovan. He'd spent years building a corrupt kingdom, only to watch it fall apart in front of his eyes. But pity held no power over her sense of justice. That evening, Donovan sat in a dimly lit office at the back of the courthouse, face contorted with rage. Kane tried to calm him. Look, we're not out of options. We can push for a mistrial if we prove the FBI used questionable methods. Donovan cut him off. Questionable methods, he spat. You heard them, they've got my voice on tape, they've got bank records, and that woman, they got her right under my nose for a year, and I never suspected a thing. Kane loosened his tie. We can attempt to argue that the wiretaps were set up without proper warrants, or maybe the FBI tampered with the recordings. Donovan's nostrils flared. That's going to be a tough sell. You saw how the jury looks at me now. They think I'm some gangster with a badge. Kane rubbed his temples. Henry, you have to keep it together. If we go in tomorrow looking desperate, we'll lose the jury completely. Let me handle the legal angles, you just stay calm. Donovan slammed a fist on the table. That's easy for you to say, you're not the one facing prison time. I built my entire career with my own 2 hands, and now I might lose everything because some uppity FBI agent decided to make me her target. The statement bristled with anger. Donovan had always been sensitive about any perceived challenge, particularly from black professionals who threatened his sense of authority. Kane read the tension in his client's voice. He had seen it before in men like Donovan, so used to power that the idea of losing it made them lash out in toxic ways. We can request a plea deal, Kane ventured carefully, though he already anticipated Donovan's response. Plea deal, Donovan hissed, his upper lip curling. I'm not confessing to anything. Kane exhaled heavily. Then we go all the way to a verdict. But if the evidence is as airtight as it seems, Henry, we're in serious trouble. Donovan rose abruptly, pacing the small office. He paused at the door, turning to glare at Kane. You fight this. I'm not giving that woman the satisfaction of seeing me beg. Morning broke, ushering in the final day of testimonies. Spectators crammed the gallery, eager to witness the trial's climax. Donovan sat rigidly, his face etched with simmering indignation. Maya arrived with Bennington, carrying a sense of quiet confidence. The prosecution called up one final witness, an FBI informant who had once been close to Donovan. This man, a nervous figure in a rumpled suit, explained how Donovan had coached him on cleaning money from illicit activities. He told me the best ways to deposit smaller amounts in multiple bank branches to avoid suspicion, the informant confessed, voice shaking. The tension soared. Donovan grew red with fury, but he didn't dare cause a courtroom scene again. Then, with the last piece of the puzzle placed, the prosecution rested its case. Kane looked grim as he started his closing argument, trying to frame Donovan as a misunderstood cop who had resorted to questionable methods solely to reduce crime. But the line rang hollow compared to the mountain of evidence. Finally, after Bennington's succinct rebuttal, Judge Townsend sent the jury to deliberate. A hush descended as the courtroom emptied, with everyone left to pace the corridors or cluster outside. Hours passed. Maya, Bennington, and other members of the prosecution team gathered in the hallway. Agents Dixon and Carroll lingered close for security as much as companionship. Tension weighed heavily as the minutes ticked by. Then the bailiff's voice echoed, "The jury has reached a verdict." Murmuring onlookers rushed back into the courtroom. News crews scrambled to set up. In the front row, a few local activists who had initially lodged complaints against Donovan exchanged anxious looks, hands clasped together in silent hope. Donovan stood, shoulders square, eyes shifting with a mix of defiance and anxiety. The jury filed in, each member solemn. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with gray hair pulled into a bun, held a folded paper in trembling hands. Judge Townsend took the slip. Silence, thick as fog, enveloped the room. Slowly, the judge read, "On the count of conspiracy to commit racketeering, we find the defendant Henry Donovan guilty. On the count of bribery, we find the defendant Henry Donovan guilty. On the count of falsifying police reports, we find the defendant Henry Donovan guilty." A gasp of relief and disbelief rippled through the courtroom. Donovan's face drained of color. The man who had entered the trial with an arrogant grin was now trembling at the prospect of decades behind bars. Kane placed a consoling hand on Donovan's arm, but Donovan angrily shook him off. Judge Townsend's gavel resounded. "Officer Henry Donovan, you are hereby remanded to custody immediately. Sentencing will occur next month." The bailiff stepped forward to escort Donovan into custody. The crowd stirred, a swirl of emotions: satisfaction, shock, even tears, as Donovan was led away, his face contorted in a bitter scowl. His eyes flicked toward Maya, who stood with quiet dignity beside the prosecution table. The weight of her role in his downfall was palpable, yet to her, it was never about personal vendetta. This was about accountability for years of harm inflicted on vulnerable communities. Donovan turned away, shoulders slumped, stepping through the door that led to holding cells. In that moment, any last vestige of his haughty pride evaporated. In the gallery, news cameras swiveled, capturing the moment. Reporters murmured about the significance of this conviction, that it might be the catalyst for broader investigations into police misconduct. Local residents who had suffered under Donovan expressed a cautious sense of justice served. Maya gathered her notes, mentally replaying all that had transpired over the last year. This was a victory, she reminded herself, but not an end to the struggle. Corruption doesn't vanish overnight, it needs constant vigilance. Still, seeing Donovan face tangible repercussions felt like a major breakthrough. In the days following the guilty verdict, headlines dominated the local and national news. FBI agent undercover work brings down corrupt cop. Footage of Maya leaving the courthouse played on loops, and civil rights organizations praised the thorough investigation. The mayor's office released statements condemning misconduct and vowing reforms. At the J. Edgar Hoover Building in Washington, D.C., the atmosphere was somewhat celebratory. Maya's superiors congratulated her on a successful operation. Supervisory staff discussed plans to broaden the scope of the investigation, given that Donovan's network might extend further than originally believed. A culture of intimidation doesn't exist in isolation, they argued. There could be more accomplices in law enforcement who were complicit. Maya spent a day debriefing multiple teams, sharing insights from her undercover infiltration. She felt a wave of catharsis as she narrated how she first gained the criminal's trust, how she recorded the illicit deals, how close she had come to being exposed. Yet something deeper stirred in her, a reflection on how easily corruption had entrenched itself in the city and how that corruption had disproportionately targeted marginalized groups. Despite her stoic presence, the echoes of the case stayed with her. She recalled a conversation with a young black man who had been falsely arrested on Donovan's orders. He told her, tears in his eyes, "No one ever believes us when we say the system is rigged. People just assume we're lying. But you believed us, and now he's being held accountable." That, more than any award or commendation, validated the months of undercover work. It reminded her why she had joined the FBI in the first place. A week after the verdict, Maya traveled back to the same city for a follow-up meeting with local community leaders. She arrived at a modest community center where a small crowd awaited her: activists, church leaders, small business owners. Some had testified at the trial, while others had supported from the sidelines. The atmosphere was one of cautious optimism. As Maya entered the hall, people greeted her with nods of respect. She made a point to acknowledge them personally, hearing snippets of their experiences. Then, standing at a makeshift podium, she spoke candidly. "I know the conviction of Henry Donovan is a major step, but it's not the end of our fight against corruption and injustice. We need to keep reporting misconduct whenever we see it. My team and I will keep working, but we need your vigilance. This victory belongs to all of you who stood up and spoke the truth, even when it was scary or seemed hopeless." Applause resonated through the room, not boisterous, but determined. People thanked her, many with tears in their eyes, for giving them hope in a system they'd long believed was deaf to their cries. Afterward, Maya stepped outside into the warm afternoon sun. For a moment, she felt a deep sense of calm. The road to justice was always long, but days like this reminded her of the importance of each case, each conviction. Henry Donovan's sentencing came a month later. The judge handed him a lengthy prison term, multiple decades, for racketeering, bribery, and other charges. The message was clear: wearing a badge did not place one above the law. In prison, Donovan became just another inmate, stripped of the uniform that once symbolized power. Rumors suggested he struggled early on, clashing with guards who resented police officers in their midst and with inmates who learned of his betrayal of the street gangs. His life of swagger and intimidation had dissolved into a daily routine of survival. Meanwhile, Maya continued her work at the FBI. She took a brief respite after the trial but was soon assigned to a new operation. It was her calling, traveling to places where injustice hid behind official facades, peeling back layers of deception, exposing wrongdoing. She felt a renewed conviction in her abilities. Occasionally, she'd receive updates from the local activists who had confronted Donovan. They reported that the city's new police leadership was more open to dialogue, that the chilling effect Donovan had cast over their community was beginning to fade. There was a long way to go to restore trust, but at least a door had opened. Late one evening, after a grueling day of intel briefings, Maya found herself alone in her office at the J. Edgar Hoover building. She gazed at a corkboard pinned with photos, notes, and newspaper clippings related to the Donovan case. A sense of closure mingled with the hum of overhead lights. She took down the clippings, placed them in an archival file, and locked them away. The file's label read Operation Bluestorm, case closed. Yet she knew the real work was never truly finished. Another lead, another whisper of corruption, was always just around the corner, and Maya would be there, ready to gather the facts, to stand in court if needed, to remind those who abused power that the long arm of justice might be slow, but it was never still. She left her office, steps echoing in the quiet corridors. Outside, the night sky over Washington, D.C., was moonlit, the iconic shape of the Capitol building illuminated in the distance. A sense of resolve accompanied her as she returned home. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges, fresh opportunities to uphold the oath she had taken, even if she had to stand alone against a system. And just like that, it was over. The once powerful Officer Henry Donovan, who had spent years controlling the streets, now sat in a prison cell, stripped of his badge, his influence, and his freedom. His smirk was gone, replaced by the harsh reality of his actions catching up to him. But this story isn't just about one corrupt officer, it's about the power of justice, the courage of those who stand against corruption, and the truth that always finds its way to the surface. What do you think? Did Donovan get what he deserved? Let me know in the comments, and before you go, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, so you never miss a powerful story like this from Dark Stories.